Dr. Sleep is a sequel to The Shining, and though it's a great movie, you may have noticed that the vibes don't quite match those of the previous film. Well, that's because Confused yet? Let me explain. King wrote The Shining in 1977, and it added to the myriad reasons why people call him the king of horror. But even so, King has always had a penchant for sci-fi. For example, Carrie's about a young woman who develops telekinesis and then uses her new powers to get revenge on her enemies. Firestarter is about a little girl who develops pyrokinesis and uses her new powers to protect herself from the government's clutches. And The Dead Zone is about a guy who develops psionic powers and uses them to solve crimes. Notice a theme yet? Not only that, but King also developed a rich and complex shared universe with the Dark Tower at the center of it. Psionic powers of some sort often crop up in King novels, and when you read enough of them, you realize that most of the characters in his series actually have The Shining. Sometimes it's sucking up badness and spitting out flies, and sometimes it's about being able to communicate with ghosts, but it's still that same old shine. On top of that, certain enemies are from similar species, like Randall Flagg from The Stand and It from Derry. Check out this shared universe crossover.
What's outside the universe?
Outside is endless darkness, full of demons trying to get to us.
Coincidence? I think not. And the vast majority of these stories end up being about the good-natured human character versus the evil without. And The Shining is no exception. So we've already got good guys fighting bad guys using superpowers in a shared universe.
There's more people like you, too. People who stand.
Was that accidental, or were you trying to quote The Stand on purpose?
So when the time came for a director to adapt the novel to a film, there was one obvious choice.
Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're killing ourselves out here, and you've got to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
So we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door.
Stanley Kubrick? If King tells stories through the lens of evil coming from without, then Stanley Kubrick prefers stories about evil coming from within. In the novel, Jack is generally a good guy who has some character flaws, and in the end, wills himself to snap out of his possession just long enough to save his family and burn down the Overlook.
No!
But in Kubrick's version, Jack is a man who feels off from the very beginning.
They had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive.
And his past of physical violence with Danny feels like it's revealed through lawyered excuses, and never ultimately really gets cleared up.
Never do anything to hurt you. Never.
Speaking of which, a theme of ambiguity shrouds the entire film.
And you go from the lobby into the general manager's office and then into Ullman's office, and there's this window. This is an impossible window. It is physically impossible. It cannot be there. It should not be there. There's no place in the hotel for this window to exist. Wendy, when she's later down there and she sees DeColoran's body after he has been killed, you have her behind in that hallway behind the office.
You leave the experience after a single watch not fully understanding exactly what happened, or even what anyone's motive was, but you do know that you were horrified by a psychological thriller. Now, Kubrick's movie is a masterpiece, but at the end of the day, it's still a very Kubrickian film, and King himself was so offended by it that he decided to fix it.
Congratulations, Dick!
And directed a made-for-TV miniseries in order to restore his novel's original tone.
Did he express on The Shining how dissatisfied is the right word, right? Thank you. He was with the original Shining, the Kubrick?
He did. I mean, he was ultimately disappointed that a filmmaker like Kubrick kind of bowdlerized King's work. It was, in effect, Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining as opposed to Stephen King's.
In essence, King's hotel has ghosts, but Kubrick's Jack has demons.
I have a real problem with The Shining.
The book was warm and the movie was cold.
Shelley Duvall is Wendy. She's basically just there to scream. And that's not the woman that I wrote about.
Maybe I could use some caretaking, too.
What are you talking about?
But eventually, the time comes for a sequel. You see, Mike Flanagan was given Dr. Sleep to adapt as a sequel, and immediately had to decide what he was really making a sequel to.
Stanley Kubrick saw The Haunting as coming from Jack Torrance, whereas I always saw it from characters that were being threatened by forces from without, from ghosts.
Absolutely not.
Well, Mike made his choice, and he went full X-Men.
Everybody knows you never go full X-Men.
If you don't know, Dr. Sleep is about Danny, who has grown into a retired old gun and put his power-using past behind him. He just wants to lay low and have a normal life, but his plans are interrupted by a little girl with similar powers showing up and needing his help against a supervillain troop. He picks up his gun again and is guided on his path by a mentor who reminds him of his responsibilities to the light. And Kadabra, he goes on an adventure with Abra, narrowly escaping the clutches of the supervillain team. Eventually he and the girl play some chin music for the baddies, but our hero ultimately sacrifices himself to save the next generation of mutants. Or shiners. I don't know. Flanagan leans so far into King's tone that he ultimately surpasses King with his MCU structured film. But not just the structure feels different than Kubrick.
And I have made a numbered list.
Now, I've mentioned this before, but the Overlook is extremely mysterious in Kubrick's version, with no clear motive in the film. It's just kind of creepy and bad things happen. All we really know by the end of the film is that the Overlook wants the Torrance family to stay. But in Dr. Sleep, Halloran gets to act as Captain Exposition.
You remember the first time we really talked, when I spoke up inside your head? Made you feel good, right? And someday, Danny Torrance, you'll teach someone else condemned, boarded up, they're starving old ghosts, and they're reaching out. In that damn hotel, you was like a 1,000,000-watt battery, all plugged in. And it ate hungriest, and they'll eat what shines. Swarm it like mosquitoes or leeches. I want you to know this box. Stick your nose inside and see if there's a smell.
You see, in this movie, shining is released by people as physical steam that can be sucked up by shiny vampires. No relation. And it can even be collected by using thermoses. How'd they figure that out? Who built the thermoses? Aren't these guys like really old? Why isn't it some kind of crystal or clay pot or something like that? Were they not able to collect it until they invented the shiny thermoses? I don't know, the movie never explains, so moving on. Now I want you to imagine for a moment Stanley Kubrick being down for an overwrought explanation of exactly how shining works. I think if I even presented the idea of the thermoses to him, he would splash hot coffee in my face.
Shelley, I'm telling you, it's too many times. Every time he speaks emphatically, you're jumping, and it looks funny.
Unfortunately, he's not around to verify, but you know he would. You see, I think the big difference here is the gulf between hard and soft magic systems. Gandalf is a great example of a soft magic system.
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
All we really know is that Gandalf is magical, but I couldn't name any spells or figure out how to duplicate one just by watching him. Sometimes he can make his staff glow, and sometimes he can talk to moths, but you rarely see him do the same spell twice, and you never hear him name them. The opposite is Harry Potter and the hard magic system.
Expelliarmus!
We too basically learn at wizarding school how to cast Expelliarmus, and we can expect Harry Potter to cast that same spell multiple times in the movie. Danny is taught the magic power of locking ghosts inside of crates, and we do see him use the same power multiple times in the same movie. Meaning that in essence, Dr. Sleep does treat The Shining as a hard magic system versus Kubrick's massively ambiguous paranormal phenomenon. Even the bad guys in this movie are another great example of this. Dr. Sleep features a group of ne'er-do-wells, and the club even has a name, the True Knot. And like the Brotherhood of Mutants, each of them have a unique superpower that they use to bring synergy to the crew. Rose the Hat has the ability to track people with the Shining at long range. Crow Daddy has the ability to specifically track where these shiners are when Rose gets them close enough, like a bloodhound. Snakebite Andy's ability even has a name.
You're a pusher. You can push people.
And she can Jedi mind trick people. And Barry the Chunk has a really, really stupid name. Speaking of which, Dr. Sleep is a stupid name for a movie as well, but it instantly makes sense when you compare it to a name like Doctor Strange. Because in the right universe, Danny makes perfect sense as a superhero fighting against the powers of evil with his child sidekick, Abra. Really? No one ever says Kadabra in this whole movie?
Boink.
Another thing superhero movies love is the good old one-liner.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Oh, I see. So, like, none of these sound good, huh?
Something Dr. Sleep has in common. When Danny and Abra first arrive at the Overlook, he tells her to wait in the car. And when she asks why he's not going to wait with her, he responds with,
I have to wake it up.
I'd say that line invokes the feeling of, fuck yeah! Which is a reaction I don't think Kubrick was ever gunning for in The Shining. It's the kind of line you would expect from like a Jon Favreau who's mastered the art of fan service.
He had to have a stick for the fight, so we figured he kept it hidden. It's like his lightsaber.
Or here's another one. When Rose the Hat uses her psionic powers to dig into Danny's mind and sees the ghost he's locked away, and then she asks,
"What's in those? Something special, huh?"
They're not special. They're starving.
This is a total mic drop, and the music even drains out so that you can really give the line extra emphasis. I am once again asking you to imagine Kubrick having a line delivered this way. And it's not just the line delivery.
Oh, they're adorable.
Part of the mic droppiness of this moment is actually from the member berries that Danny has locked away. In fact, the vast majority of moments that take place after the drive to the Overlook, including the drive itself, is actually just one long member berry. Remember room 237? Remember the hole in the door? Oh my god, remember all those ghosts? Especially that one? I mean, Jesus, a good portion of the ending is just watching people walk around the Overlook and reminiscing over scenes from the old movie. And is that not a huge portion of what comic book movies are all about? Getting psyched because references were made to the comics or to earlier films? The MCU absolutely knows how to get a direct line to your nostalgia fifis, and they are not afraid to use it. Or another tool that comics have never shied away from, which is the retcon.
She recast Pietro?
Even the films aren't afraid to be flexible with the past in order to make room for a new idea, and Dr. Sleep is no different. Flanagan took an opportunity with this film to go back and rewrite the ending of The Shining to make it then more in line with King's original vision. Although Danny does have a sordid past, he basically becomes a fully blown good guy after spending a few years in AA, meaning in the meat of the story he's more similar to Jack from the book already. He gets possessed by a ghost and uses the last of his goodness power to wrestle control of his body back long enough to tell Abra to escape before finally burning the hotel down. I mean, you get it, you get it.
In my novel, the hotel burns. In Kubrick's movie, the hotel freezes.
So ultimately, Dr. Sleep does feel like a strange sequel when comparing it to the Kubrickian nightmare-fueled psychological horror movie, but makes perfect sense when thinking about it as what it is, a King/Flanagan suspense take on the superhero genre. Everything just falls into place, including the name. Dr. Sleep!